All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for making the time to attend our webinar on parent and family engagement. How do we make a real change? This webinar is going to be presented by Terrell Jones, our behavior support specialist in the South, and Aaron Day, our behavior support specialist in the North. Just a little housekeeping. We are recording, so this can go up on our YouTube channel for those who couldn't join us tonight. And also, I just muted everybody who entered as well. So if you would like to talk with us or you have any questions, the chat should be open. If it's not, if somebody would raise their hand and let me know. Sometimes we have issues with that. We will absolutely send out the PowerPoint to you. If you, in fact, I think I'll just send out the PowerPoint to everybody who registered for this. I can pull those analytics from Zoom and we'll send them your way as soon as this is over. For the record, this is Alicia Zeman, the PBIS coordinator talking. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'm going to let the BSSs get started. T, if you would like to switch to the next slide, I'd appreciate that. So we're sharing our screen and sometimes there's a delay the first time you start to do that. So we are coming to you from the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. And the TA Center is a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education. Specifically, we are the school-wide PBIS team. Terrell, if you'll go to the next slide. This is an example of the state. We actually have 6 behavior support specialists that are broken up into regions. If you take a look at this, you'll see that we have Aaron Day in the north as a school-wide behavior support specialist, Terrell Jones in the south, Jen Fletcher in the mountain region, and Tiffany Hendershot in the eastern panhandle, all working with the school-wide PBIS team. Just a little housekeeping about that. Jen and Tiffany are both off right now. So if you are in the mountain or eastern panhandle and you need more information, feel free to reach out to me, Alicia Zeman at Holt64 at marshall.edu. Jen has recently welcomed a baby girl and Tiffany is on military duty. So I am helping cover those regions. So please know that you are covered. If you have any request or anything that you need help with, all you have to do is reach out to me and we'll make sure that we can help you in any way that we can. If you go ahead and look at the blue and red triangles, those represent our early childhood behavior support specialist. We have Sarah Smouse in the northern region with the blue triangles, and I believe she's on here. We're so happy to see you, Sarah. And we have Jess George in the south with the red triangles. So if you have a pre-K to K and even sometimes pre-K to 2 need, or you're interested in early childhood positive behavioral interventions and supports, we would love for you to reach out to us as well because we can support you with that age group in the work that we do. And the whole state is covered by mental health first aid. That's that third kind of project that we are responsible for at the TA Center, and the coordinator of that is Diana Bailey Miller. Diana Bailey Miller. If you are interested in having some mental health first aid training, you can fill out our request and we can get you in touch with her as well. All right, Terrell. Really, our mission is to assist teachers, students, families, and communities that are faced with challenging behaviors and mental health issues through training, resources, and promotion of evidence-based strategies and interventions. The foundation of what we do is in PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, but we do trainings on childhood trauma and trauma-informed classrooms, challenging behaviors and classroom procedures, functions of behavior and data analysis, family engagement, self-care for educators, and honestly, if you have a need that fits within our realm, we are more than happy to do the research and see however we can help you. So I will make sure to put a link in the chat box of how you can request assistance from us. As I said, this training will be up on our YouTube channel, which if you go to YouTube and type in WVBMHTAC, it'll pop up. We have several webinars and videos that we've created over the last year. And lastly, I will put a little advertisement out there to go join us on Facebook at WVPBIS. That's where we do a lot of the advertising for our webinars. Our goal is to do at least one of these webinars once a month. and maybe potentially more. So if you would go join us there, that will keep you up to date with anything that we have coming your way. Terrell, you can go on to the next slide. We want to make sure that we send a special shout out to Nancy Klein. We realized in about November and December that family engagement was a topic that was we were seeing requests for across the whole state, and we started to reach out to our national advisors for guidance in the PBIS world when it comes to family engagement. And we reached out to Nancy Klein at the Department of Ed, and she spent a morning with us, leading us and really guiding our mindset for how we're going to talk about family engagement today. She's wonderful, and she's a wonderful person and a wonderful resource to reach out to. So we cannot thank her enough, as well as Dawn Kincaid at the National Center in Kelly Perales at Midwest PBIS for guiding our thinking when it comes to family engagement. And with that, I'm going to turn over this show to Terrell Jones, who's going to kick off the family engagement. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can always email me at Holt, HOLT 64 at marshall.edu.
All right. Thank you so much, Alicia. If you all see me doing one of these things, I don't know what it is, but I have this black dot in the middle of my screen. But I know my slides. But Aaron and Day and I are so excited to share this information with you. And so I'm just going to go over a couple things, objectives that we are going to be talking with you. The first one is going to be family engagement. And I'm going to be covering these: relationships matter, using your data. And then Miss Erin Day is going to come in and follow me and talk about mindset shift, cultural considerations, family engagement as a multi-tiered system of support. Now, before we continue, here we go. Thank you, whoever did that. Love you. Teamwork. Okay, my computer's takes a minute. Well, anyway, I'm going to be talking a little bit about whenever I get to the next slide, we are going to be focused on, anytime I say the word parent, I'm talking about family. I'm talking about, when I talk about parent, I'm talking about, it could be the biological parent, it could be the foster parent, it could be grandma, it could be grandma, grandpa. Just anybody who's the primary person who is taking charge, taking care of the student, of the child or the adolescent. And I am frozen on my end. I don't know why. One more, Erin. You're beautiful. I love you. All right. So a lot of times, I'm so sorry about that, but we will get running with this. A lot of times when we talk about family engagement, one of the first things that people might ask us, or they ask us, is, so what is the difference between family involvement and family engagement? And so we like to point out that family involvement really has a lot to do with, it focuses a lot on parent participation. How many parents are attending the school events, the after school programs? How many of them are attending? How many are walking through the door? And it's also about, it's where teachers are providing the learning resources and the information about student grades, such as how is Johnny doing in the classroom? And so unlike family involvement, unlike family engagement, in family involvement, we specifically have teachers wanting to become, engaged. Like, the primary responsibility in family involvement is where teachers are the role, the leader in actually implementing all of the student educational grades, setting those educational tabs for the student rather than the parent. And so really it's also about the quantity versus the quality. So it's more focused on how many people are attending the meetings, the IEP meetings, how many people are attending the after school programs, how many families, how many parents are attending the parent-teacher conferences. And so it's really about what the teacher is saying, what they're doing what the teacher is saying to the parent. Now, family engagement, on the other hand, it is an ongoing active process where family members are actually invited to take part. They're actually invited to become equal partners in the developing of their child's educational goals. Okay, so that's significant. It's like they are involved in the decision-making process. They are involved in implementing it, in planning for it. And that's a really significant part because they have a voice. And it's important then with family engagement that often we ask the question, what do I need to do to get these parents, my parents, involved in the classroom? Or better yet, what do I need to do to get that parent involved? Rather than just showing up in the building and being present, how can I get them more involved in their child's experience? And so a lot of times with family engagement, it's focused on the quality. So it's asking yourself, what is my relationship with that parent who does attend the IEP meeting, the parent-teacher conference? What is my relationship with the family that does attend the family meetings? It's not so much how many are attending, but about the relationship, the quality of relationship. Erin? So one of the great things that teachers do is you all provide substantial amount of information and advice for parents, and it's extremely important that they receive this. However, it is also just as important that we take the time to listen to our parents, because a lot of times the parents also have this very important information about their child that an educator may not know. And this could be the missing piece to the puzzle. This could be, now I get it, why Johnny is behaving the way he is in the classroom. Now I understand why Sally is skipping math or skipping school. And so it's really important that we have both perspectives at the table, that we are listening to our parents. And we do this, actually, when you add the perspective of the parent along with the teacher, what you're doing is you're actually enriching that child's educational experience. And that's why we really strongly say that with families, schools that actually strive to implement family management or family involvement in their schools, they tend to lead with their ears. They tend to ask the questions and listen to the parent and what they're saying. What are they thinking? Have them share their thoughts with you. And family engagement is about asking, what are your hopes for your child? What do you hope that your child gets at the end of the week, the month, the year, while he or she is in my school classroom? What are your worries about your child? What are your concerns? And so when you really think about it, family engagement is not about serving families at all. It's about gaining partners. It's about gaining that support from your families, your parents. Erin? Alrighty, so we always talk about research a lot with PBIS because we like to back everything up with research, evidence-based practice as well. I'm going to bring a little bit of information about what the research says about family engagement. Now, we know that it does suggest that family involvement, having family interest, and having family support, there's positive results. We know it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have invested so much time in family involvement. But almost all of the research supports the fact that family engagement will give you your bigger bang. You will have more positive results. And these positive results are earning a higher grade or test score. With children who have engaged parents, not just interested, but they're actually engaged in their educational experience. They will graduate from high school and attend a post-secondary education. They will develop self-confidence and motivation in the classroom. Children with engaged parents have better social skills and classroom behaviors. They are less likely to be absent from school, which this is a really big concern when I was working when I was actually going into the schools. It was a big concern, and even more so now with COVID-19. But when you have children with engaged parents, they're less likely to be active or absent. They're less likely to have low self-esteem and less likely to be redirected in the classroom. Erin? Alrighty, so it's really then family engagement, how I look at it, it's just getting to know your parents, getting to know your students, getting to know your families. And a lot of times it's about just asking those right questions, the questions they're not just focusing on the child, the student, but they're also focusing on the parent and the family. And so I'm not going to go through all of these questions, but I'm just going to review some of them that I think that are really significant. The first one, Erin, if you could do. Thank you. Delay. What do you see in your child's greatest strengths or skills? Now, this sets the tone, and it really does, because it sets the tone for your school. It sets the tone for your classroom climate, and it also sets the tone of the relationship that you're going to build, the partnership that you're going to build with your family, with your parents, because it shows them, I'm not only interested in your son or daughter's deficits where we need to work on their skills deficit, but you know what? I'm also interested in what they're good at, where their strengths are. Therefore, what I can do then is that I can work on those strengths and make them even better, to maximize them so that they can be working at their fullest potential. All right, Erin, the next one. So what was your experience like in this grade? This is a great one to ask parents, because this is actually going to give you a window into where they're coming from, a perspective. And it's going to help you to distinguish, maybe I need to focus a little bit more on this, because if this parent had a bad experience, or that they didn't graduate from high school, it was just a bad feel for them, you might have to put a little bit more effort where they were able to trust you and see that, you have their back, bring them apart. And so they might be a little bit intimidated to offer their advice, intimidated to give you some information. But that's where we can come in and we can basically help them to see that they are part of their child's educational system. They are part of their educational skills tactic. Next, Erin. And how and when would you like to be in touch? How would you like me to be in touch with you this year? And this was really important when I was working with grandparents and great grandparents, because I'm telling you, right, great grandparents, they rarely use the internet. So if sending an email was easy for me, but a lot of my great grandparents and grandparents weren't getting them because they didn't use the internet, or families that don't have internet. And so this is a good way of saying, you know what, I'm considering you. I want you to tell me what's best for you. But I love the second part. What do you hope I'll communicate with you? And this is a really good question, because this could be when you make that contact with them, when you do call them on the phone, you could start off with this, what it is that they want to hear. And it's showing them that I'm listening to you, and we have a partnership with this situation. Erin, is there anything else you can tell me about your child that you think would be important? And this is where it's important that we do get that parent information from there. I was working in a high school with a 10th grader, and this particular student was not doing so well at all. He was a good student, but for some reason his grades were starting to decline, and he was skipping classes. And so I reached out to his parent, and to make a very long story short, to find out that his sister had recently married and she moved out. And it was not easy for him to drive. It was at a distance where he couldn't drive to her home on a regular basis. Now, this sister was his support system. And so we were able to engage this family within his educational structure. So his sister actually was engaged in his classroom experience, that whenever he started to feel a panic attack, he would be able to excuse himself, because the whole school, all of his teachers and the principal, assistant principal, we were all in on the same thing. So he could excuse himself to call his sister just for 5 minutes, and she would walk him through it. That is a great example of how you can use a family member as part of a family engagement and as part of his educational process. Erin? So it is every educator's responsibility to engage family. It really is. And one of the most effective ways that we can do this is to show our parents how they can support us, how they can support us on the playground, how they can support us in the cafeterias, how they can support us in our classrooms. A lot of times, even with our students, sometimes it's not that they won't do something for us. 9 times out of 10, it's that they don't know how to. And so we have to share with our parents how they can support us. And a lot of times it starts first by sharing them with the why it is that we, have an expectation that Sally has to raise her hand before she before she speaks in classroom? Why is it that we require Johnny to have his web camera on during this particular activity? And so when I share this with people, a lot of times they might say, so why should I? This is my classroom. Why should I have to explain that? Well, this is because by sharing the why actually doesn't not only motivate you, but the research strongly supports the fact that it invites the listener to take part in the conversation and become engaged. It provides reasons for and clarifies any questions and misunderstandings. So when you share with them the why, what happens is if they have any misunderstandings, like, why are you picking on my son? Why are you singling out my daughter in your classroom? But when you take that time and explain why it is that you're doing what you're doing, parents are far more likely to accept it because they're like, I get it now. It's not just about my child. Every child is expected to raise their hand. And then they become part of the team. This is where you can get them involved and say, you know what? Could you do me a favor? Could you remind Sally periodically to raise her hand before she speaks out, before she shouts out an answer? Erin? Also, when you share the why, listeners become less defensive and more empathetic towards your needs. If you can think about a time, if you went to a coworker and if you said, I want you to do this for me, and the coworker said, why should I do that for you? And we just said, because I said so, because I'm the one in charge here. I'm the leader here. I guarantee you that coworker is going to become more defensive and they're going to be less empathetic towards your need because you never considered them. You never took the time to consider them and explain to them. Erin? So it is extremely important that when we engage with families, that we meet them where they are, especially during COVID-19. I've had several social workers, teachers come up to me and share with me and say, you know what, I'm skilled in this. School counselors, I'm skilled, but I'm really still struggling with how to make sure that my daily responsibilities during COVID-19, work responsibilities, are tackled, but yet meet the needs of my children at home, their educational needs. And so we really need to meet parents where they are. But most importantly, to have a really thick concept of every parent has some ability to support their child's learning. Erin, if you can click one more time. Now, this is not, went to the next screen. It's okay. That was not my quote. That quote is probably at the bottom, which Erin did click and I just can't see it. It's by Nancy Klein. And when Nancy Klein was talking about all of this, I was writing as fast as I could. I couldn't keep up with her. But this really struck hard with me because working with parents in high schools and even in elementary schools, junior high schools, every parent has that ability. Whether it's working with that parent to get their child up early so that they can get to the bus on time, or working with that parent to make sure that their student has a shirt on and the shirt doesn't have, language on it that's inappropriate when he turns the web camera on. And what do we do when that particular parent is giving it their all? We might think, we can't think, man, that's all they're doing. No, get the small wins with them. So when they start, when you see that Johnny is wearing his shirt every time now because the parent reminds him, the parent is supporting you, that's when we reach out to the parent and say, thank you. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being my partner, Erin. And that's why it's important that we understand that they have potential to have some effect in their child's learning. Every parent does. So a lot of times what we do here then is that it's just after we shared with the whys, then it's important to share the how it's being done in our schools, how it's being done in the classrooms, how it's being done, how it's being taught, how it's being acknowledged, so once their child is behaving in a way that we want them to behave, how are we letting them know that? And one way to do it is a school-wide expectation matrix. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do this. All right. I'm not saying that you have to have a school-wide expectation. I'm just saying this is one really good example of how you can share the how-tos, because this actually gives a parent a window into your cafeterias, your playgrounds, your classrooms, not so that they can control, but so that they can actually support you. So they can say, I know, I understand now, wearing clothes that my child has to go to school or be on the web camera wearing clothes that meets the dress code. Alrighty, so they can support you with that, Erin. And this is another excellent one. This is a classroom expectation. Alrighty, I like this one. I'm not going to go too much into it, but I just wanted to share it with you because this is a window into your classroom, especially for those kiddos that you seem to be having to address with certain behaviors more than others. And I like the one, particularly with the 10th grader. If I know I would have used this had I've had it back years ago when I was working with that 10th grader, I would probably engage not only his teacher, but his sister and his mother in that column where it says, when you feel upset, because that way it's supporting that client. And we're getting those families engaged in supporting that client in our student in our classrooms. Erin? This is a great way to end with the how-tos. And this is a strong one because this is where you are providing something tangible for parents to take home with them and use. This is where you're going to get your engagement piece, your relationship piece, because what you're doing is you're demonstrating that you are reaching out to them by sharing with them a tool, a tool that they can take home, not only to support themselves, but not only to support themselves, but to help them teach their child a life skills strategy while they're at home. So that's why I love this tool, because it gets the parent involved in the classroom, but also in their homes. Erin? So now we're going to talk a little bit about relationship matters and the significant part of it. Erin? Now, I call this slide, I hope I don't embarrass her, but I call this slide the Nancy Klein slide. And because I found this to be a wonderful, what she was talking about, wonderful piece of information. And I have to be honest with you, sometimes I go back and forth, rules are important, relationships are important, but here's the thing, relationships matter more than rules. Now, when I say this, I'm going to be honest with you, rules are important. I couldn't even imagine stepping on a playground without having some types of rules or expectations. I wouldn't even put a big toe into a classroom without rules and expectations. These are significant. We need them. Otherwise, it'll be chaotic. But when it comes down to the end, relationships do matter more than rules. And if you imagine it this way, if the majority of your conversation with a parent or parents is telling them, your phone calls is, Johnny's not meeting my expectation again. Johnny keeps breaking the rules again. And if this is time and time again, by maybe not the first or second, but probably by the 6th or 7th phone call, that mom or that parent, dad, grandmother, they're going to eventually interpret, the message to them is going to be that Johnny's teacher, Sally's teacher, is more concerned about his or her rules than my child. That Johnny's teacher is more concerned about looking at what he's not doing in my classroom than what he is doing right in the class, in his classroom. And so that's why it's really important that when we talk to parents, that it's not just about breaking the rules. And when we do talk to them, explain why it is that we do what we do. Because if we're like, think about it, the fundamental reason why we have rules is because we care about our students. So if we are talking to our parents and we share with them time and time again that I have rules and expectations because I care about your child's safety, I care about your child's educational experience, and I want to make sure that all of your child's needs are getting met. And if this message is brought out time and time again when you call them, then therefore you're going to have more of the parents stopping and listening to what you're saying, because then they realize she or he is interested in my child. They're going to become more active. They're going to want to support you. They're going to be more accepting of what you're saying. And we have something that we use in PBIS, okay? Some would say 4-to-1 ratio, 5-to-1 ratio, but what it is, it's basically, it's using your rules and the expectations to develop relationships. Relationships, you can do it with the students in your classroom, with the parents, because it's for every one time that you have to correct a child where a child is not meeting an expectation. 5 times you show that child how he or she is meeting the expectation. And then that is your piece. That's your buy-in. That's when you call your parents. You start off by saying, guess what great things Johnny or Sally's doing today in our classroom? And you've got 5 or 4 of them right there. But then you would say, but the but is not going to be as hard to take if you're starting off with all these positives that they're doing. And then you can say, but we still need to work on Sally raising her hand before she shouts out a question. And that's why it's important to establish these positive relationships with parents. Erin? And really, it only takes seconds to connect with somebody. It really does. It's our eye contact with them. What language do we use, Erin? And the words. What words we use matter, because words are powerful. They can crush a heart or heal it. They can shame a soul or liberate it. They can shatter dreams or energize them. They can obstruct connection or invite it. They can create defenses or melt them. We have to use words wisely, Erin. And so how would you respond to somebody if they communicated to you? I love this one. And Erin, you can just keep going all the way to the bottom. In a warm and positive manner. How would you respond to somebody who fostered a sense of trust with you, who communicated with you often, kept you in the loop, asked you what forms of communication that work best for you? And they asked you questions and listened. They weren't those individuals that ask a question and they don't listen to you because they're more interested in what they're going to say after, but they really listen to what you're saying with no biased assumptions, where they acknowledge your involvement and where you walked away feeling valued, Erin. And so I'm going to now talk about using your data, Erin. All right, it's important then that we check, we have fidelity when we use the family engagement. Are we doing it as what we're supposed to be doing? Are we hitting the mark? I think data is extremely important in a large amount of what we do, because it should be actually our primary indicators on how we move, the decisions that we make. It's it's like a guide on our decisions. It's a guide that shows us what comes next on our action plan. And so one of the best effective ways at making sure that we're hitting the mark when we're communicating, when we're calling our parents, when we're talking with them, building that relationship, is a family communication log. Now, you don't have to use this one. I just found this one on the internet. And I'm going to show you in a couple slides later how you can obtain this on our website. But if you look to the right of your screen where it says brief description of nature of contact, this is significant, because when you write, you're going to write down what's transpired through that conversation. And so when you contact that parent again, they're not going to see this log sheet. You're going to then you're going to go back and say, so tell me, we talked about 2 weeks ago. How is that home matrix video that I sent you? How is that working? How is that working for you? So the parent is going to be like, wow, they remembered talking, they remembered that, I was having some difficulties with so-and-so, at home, or it just shows them that you are interested. And that's why I think this is a powerful communication log. All right, Erin. And then this is an also great strategy, a handout. It's the Family Engagement Strategy Checklist, because it shares with you, are you rarely using it? Sometimes, consistently. But look at the right side where you have priorities. Okay, so this is our priority. So if you are rarely doing this and it's a priority, and teachers, educators can do this individually, or it can be it could be a building requirement. It could be a requirement of all educators, depending on how the administrators want to use this. But if it's a priority and you have it checked rarely or sometimes, that's a good indicator that this might be something that you need to focus on or should be focused on. But I also encourage not to have too many priorities. It's important that we don't overwhelm ourselves, because yes, all of these could be significant to us, significant to our families and to our students. But let's get our small wins. Let's work with maybe one or two or 3 or 4. but not overwhelm ourselves. Erin? And so here's where you can obtain these handouts. You would just go to West Virginia or wvpbis.org, and you will locate topics. As you see where I have that gold star. And once you click on topics and family, then you'll go down to the bottom left and you'll see webinar resources. And there's your communication log and your family engagement strategy checklist. Erin? And last, I'm going to talk about the common barriers to family engagement. And this is where we really need to take our families into consideration, especially at this time of COVID-19. But even before COVID-19, busy work schedules for parents and care providers. It could be discomfort in the building could be a common barrier, especially for that parent who had bad experiences before. Fears that adults at school will treat their children differently if they raise concerns. I actually had parents tell me that they did not want their teachers or educators to know that they had certain struggles because they were afraid that they would be treated differently. A lack of guidance on how to communicate with schools is a really big one. But I think the biggest one for our rural areas are just a lack of transportation on getting there. I can't tell you how many meetings we had before COVID that were over the phone, especially with our grandparents and great grandparents and parents, that had both parents working or a single mom working 2 jobs. So they were just doing what they can. And so really that's my slides so far. Erin, you can do the next. Okay, and so now I'm going to hand it over to Erin, where she's going to start talking to you about the mindset shift of family.
All right, thanks, Terrell. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay. All right, great. Sorry, I just can't see anybody's picture on my screen. All right, so thank you, Terrell, for sharing that information. And I hope that what's happening for everybody right now is that while you're listening to this, you're realizing that the way you have been viewing family involvement needs to encompass a mindset shift now, and to look at that a little bit differently, especially through the lens of family engagement, which I'm going to talk to you about just a little bit more. But when we talk about this mindset shift, I want you to think about how many of the things that you do for families at your school that require a physical presence in the building, that center around the school's needs, and that engage in one directional communication. Coming from the classroom pretty recently, I can tell you that I was guilty of a lot of these, and looking at the success of having families involved based on these questions. And I wish I knew then what I knew now. So hopefully this information is going to help you make this shift in your practices to get more meaningful interactions with your families. So Terrell touched on this already, but I'm going to go back over it because I think it's a really important conversation to have when we're talking about the idea of this mindset shift. Typically, we've looked at parent involvement as the quantity when we're measuring the success. So the number of people that are showing up in person, or how many people you have volunteering, or the people coming to classroom parties, or the number of participants you had sign up for something. But really we're learning, like Alicia said, through our conversations with a lot of different people, and especially the conversation we got to have with Nancy Klein at the Department of Ed, and taking that shift to looking at the quality of engagement activities that we're providing. So that's really focusing in on a family's ability to support their child, the access to resources that they're able to have, them being able to support what the school is doing, and then the number of families that are impacted by the things you're putting in place. And really, we know that, as Terrell already said, that family engagement includes all the ways that families support students, not just the ways that require them to be physically present in the building. And some ideas for this are some things that we've typically done as educators in schools. Things like your parent-teacher conferences, your parent volunteers, having a curriculum night or a parent night at school, and then your school newsletter. And taking these things that you're already doing and just shifting your focus on them and how they can shift from parent involvement to parent engagement. So some quick examples of that. If you're looking at parent teacher conferences, are you providing information upfront to your parents before that date so they have time to reflect on that and generate questions that they want to discuss with you, rather than having them feel like they're put on the spot in that quick moment during parent teacher conference nights, or having parents not show up at all? When you're looking at your volunteers or anybody entering your building, is your building welcoming to them? Do they feel like they're a part of that community in the school? Are you getting feedback on activities like your curriculum night? And are you able to switch gears to that to really accommodate the families who aren't able to be there in person physically? Nancy shared the story of this, and it rings true for me as well. Both of my parents, um, worked full time. A lot of a lot of us are in that situation, and they aren't able to necessarily participate in all the activities. Or parents that work different shifts aren't able to come to things in the evening. So we're never going to find a time or place that meets everyone's needs to be physically present. So how are we able to shift gears to include them in that anyway? And then looking at your classroom or your school newsletter and looking at whether or not that's giving information, or is there a way that you're allowing engagement and participation and feedback in the things that your school is doing? So those are just a really quick example. Those actually come from an article that you can find on our website, and it was a really great article, and it gave me a lot of information and really helped to shape my thoughts on this topic, and really got me thinking about this through a different lens. So if you go to our website, again at wvpbis.org, and you go to topics across the top and click on family, you will find that article. It's that first link there, 11 easy tips to really engage with families. And it was a really quick read that gave a lot of great examples that go into much more detail than what I just did. So I would encourage you to look that up to kind of get your gears turning on how you can start to shift gears at your school. Really, what that article focuses on, and what Terrell was talking about, and what I'm going to finish wrapping up today, is the idea of what if our families truly felt involved, not just invited to events. Again, we know they're not all coming, and they're not all participating, and for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. I know I'm guilty of that too. There's things my stepson's school have done that we have not done in the evenings. It just either didn't work out with our schedule, or wasn't a topic that related to something that was a need for us. And it's not that we are not engaged in his education, because we very much are. But if they're looking at the number of participants, we certainly wouldn't have been counted in that. So just making sure that we're looking at all the pieces that go into family engagement. And that all leads to the idea of needing to create a systems change, to really reflect again on those questions of, is what we've done always done working? Is it relevant in the current context? And how do we create real and meaningful change? In an article that I was reading, this quote stuck out to me, and it really kind of helped to drive this presentation. I remember reading this and telling Alicia and Terrell about this quote, saying, this is what we need right now, especially in what we're going through. And I wish that I had this quote in my pocket last year when I was still in the classroom. And as you can see, it says, as we continue to adjust to this new virtual learning environment, success will depend to a large extent on whether we can shift our focus from tactical to strategic. And there is nothing more strategic than school climate. And we know that the school climate most certainly has always involved our families, but it does even more so now. So now that we're kind of out of that survival mode, because we've been in this world of education for almost a year now, are we being strategic in the things that we're doing? And that's really what I want to talk to you about today when we're talking about how to engage our families. So Terrell and Alicia and some other coworkers and I had a lot of conversations about how we could present this idea of family engagement through a new lens, because we know it's a lot of information to put out there. And a lot goes into the things you do to make sure that you're supporting families. I know that you're already working hard to do that. And you're already trying everything you've known to try to get your families as involved and as engaged as you can. So we wanted to really make sure that we were organizing this information in a way that made sense to the people putting it into place. And if you have done any PBIS trainings with us, you'll know that we talk about a multi-tiered system of support. This is something you'll also be familiar with in education when you're talking about different types of academic interventions as well. When you're looking at those tiers of tier one being available to all of your students, or in this case, all of your families, and that's typically successful for about 80 to 90% of those that are receiving them. For those that need more support, you would move into tier two, which is more targeted to encompass that 10 to 15% that are remaining. And then the ones with the most need in tier three for those intensive interventions for that remaining 1 to 5% that really need that extra layer of support in addition to the other tiers. So an activity that I have done when I've done this training in some smaller settings is to ask educators what comes to mind when you think of these words on the screen, when you think of school and COVID and learning. And these answers are typically the ones that we're seeing when we're asking those questions. And if you look here, you'll see words like difficult, hard, different, challenging, anxiety, stressful, new, scared. And we know that as educators, you're feeling all of these things right now, especially with things having gone back and forth for so long. But we also know that this is no different for our families and our students, and that they're feeling all of those same things and then some. And that led us into the conversation of cultural considerations. And really, what that means is that we're not all in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. So the quote there says, I heard that we are all in the same storm, but it's not like that. We're in the same storm, but not in the same boat. And if you look at the picture there of the storm coming up on the cruise ship compared to the rowboat, that we're all experiencing this pandemic and we're all experiencing similar things. But what we have in place to deal with them is much different for each person that's affected by it. So that made us realize that our families, and when we talk about family engagement, we've really got to take into consideration those things that make each of our situations different. So I'm going to play this video for you quickly. There is sound, but maybe. But you'll have to read the words on the screen. It doesn't talk to you. And as soon as I can make it a little bit bigger, I'll make sure to start it over from the beginning so that you're able to read it. Need to make sure I close that out because last time it started a new video. All right, so as you can see in that video, what it's talking about is access to internet. And I know that that is an issue that a lot of our families and a lot of even our educators are up against across the state here. And as you can see from the video, that's an issue that we're seeing also across the country. So that's just one thing that is a huge factor into thinking about how we're engaging families. Not only is it impacting how students are able to engage in academics, but it's going to play in part in how we're able to engage with families while we know that we aren't able to have them in person. So just wanted to share one very specific example with you. But when we talk about these cultural considerations or the idea that we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats, we know that this issue is multidimensional, and that each family, like I said, is coming from different and unique circumstances. So some things that we're going to need to consider when we're building these interventions, so to speak, for family engagement. We're going to have to think about our parents' work schedules. Like I mentioned earlier, you have some parents who are working right now inside of the home because of COVID. Some parents are working full time outside of the home. Some parents aren't able to work at all. And some parents are working different shifts. And all of those things impact how they're able to engage with their students academically and to build engagement and relationships with our families in our schools. Thinking about things about different family dynamics and families' personal experiences, parents' skill sets and their struggles, socioeconomic status of our families, their access again to internet. Terrell touched on transportation, which is a big issue for a lot of families in the state, and their access to resources that are available in communities. Whether or not parents and guardians have experienced trauma or ACEs, their own academic level and background, and their experiences with school. And all of these things play a part into how we look at family engagement and how we need to make sure that we're taking these into consideration as we're dealing with these situations. And really, what that boils down to is making sure that we validate what's going on in all of their lives. So, how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're taking these things, having these things in our mind when we're building these activities or these interventions for engagement? And really, we want to talk about whether or not you are experts on your school community. So, do you know about your school's demographics? Do you know what is inviting to parents and what things are a turnoff to them? And do you know what cultural considerations need to be taken into account? Those things that we mentioned before. So one way to do this is to elicit family feedback. Terrell had a slide earlier that asked, do they know that their voice matters? So are we getting their feedback in things like surveys, conversations with them, or giving them opportunities to respond to newsletters or notes or activities that are happening within the school? And the other part of the slide said, are we listening? So are we being receptive and responsive to the feedback that we're getting? So criticism can be hard, but if parents are critical of things that are happening, are we receptive and responsive to that? I know one time, Alicia and I worked in the same school before she started here. With the TA Center. And she and I were doing an after school program for students falling into that tier 2 and tier 3 category. And we had developed this huge plan. We had all the steps laid out, all the communication set up, and we thought this thing was really going to help impact students in a positive way. But we quickly started to get some negative feedback from the families that were participating because they were viewing it in a negative way, which was not our intention at all in what we had set up. We had set up a program that we were really hoping to put in interventions into place for these students and really help them be successful at school. But when we realized that our students and our families were looking at it through a negative lens, we knew it wasn't going to be effective. So we had to take a step back and really think about that feedback we were getting and say, if this is how it's being perceived and it's not how we want it to be perceived, then we need to make some changes so that everybody's on the same page and everybody is a willing participant in this. So we had to open up our own minds, take that criticism to heart, and turn it into a positive experience for everybody. And sometimes I know that's that's hard to do because we put a lot of work and a lot of thought into the things that we're planning. I know when it comes to family involvement, I worked in a Title I school for 10 years, and I know what goes into planning those activities and how much energy and thought goes into that. And when it's not well received, it's really disappointing. So for allowing that feedback up front, and really being receptive to that and really responding to that in a positive way, then we can really turn things around to make a good difference. Um, for our students and our families. Some other things to consider, especially now in our current situation, are, whether or not parents need supports at home with homework or technology, or their behavior. Terrell showed a great example of an expectation matrix that could be made at home. And that's a really great way to engage families in a practice that students are familiar with in school, to help them also be successful in that setting when they're at home as well. Making sure you're thinking of those things to consider, regarding cultural considerations, asking what their preferred method of communication is. Some parents are more comfortable texting on an app than they are receiving a phone call, and some are the opposite and would rather pick up the phone and talk to you rather than interacting, digitally. So, really finding out how they prefer to communicate and making sure you're reaching out to them in those ways. And then looking at your school's environmental design. I talked about that quickly when I talked about the idea of whether or not that building was welcoming. But that also goes into our virtual environments as well. You'll see there it says whether you're brick or click. So whether you're in the building or whether you're engaged online, are they overwhelmed by that first click and then they shut down and don't want to continue? Or is the way we have things designed welcoming to them, regardless of the environment? So, as I mentioned, all of this background has led us to the idea of looking at family engagement as a multi tiered system of support. So, looking at how we can tier the things we put into place to meet the needs of our families in the most effective manner. Um, so, with any type of tiered system, you're going to look at tier one first, and you're really going to make sure that you have that in place in a solid manner, to encompass all of your family. So, all families would receive access to those tier one supports and interventions. So, this is going to include things like your communication, whether you send out newsletters or your school has a website or a Facebook page or Twitter, or a way that you're communicating with every family, that they all have access to that. Again, that environmental design is your building welcoming to families. Do they feel like they can come there and have a conversation with you? And is your virtual environment welcoming to them as well? Are they able to send messages when they have questions? Are they able to find what they need on your website to help their students at home? Things like family surveys. And again, that idea of helping with PBIS at home, or the idea of, how to help parents figure out structure and routine and expectations at home. I know I was teaching last spring when the state went virtual in March. I had a second grader here at home, and I was struggling with this. And I knew, if, as a teacher who was very skilled in PBIS, if I struggled with getting routine set up at home, that it was likely that families that had no educational background as far as being a teacher, would most likely struggle too, and to no fault of their own, because they just don't know, how to do that if that's not something they've been trained in doing. So, how are you supporting your families with setting up routines, setting up structures, how to be, responsible with your work at home? Again, that technical support, and when we're able to, having school-based activities. But when we're not able to, or even looking into the future past the pandemic, looking at how we can really, encourage bonding and family at home activities, which I'll share an example of that with you here in just a few minutes. So those are just a few examples of what could be considered tier one, activities for family engagement, and obviously there are many more that would fall into that category. But for those families who you may have identified as in need based on any surveys you've done with your school, or if you've set up certain data decision points. Maybe you're looking at socioeconomic status. Maybe you're looking at students who are not engaged online, or whatever data decision you're putting in place. If there are families that are falling into that category or not responding to your tier one communications or the activities that you have in place, or that are struggling to still be successful after they are engaged in those families would fall into and be considered a tier two family in need of a little bit more intensive um, interventions. And you can see there in the triangle it says group. So you would group these families together and offer things like specialized support groups, maybe based on those surveys results, a check-in, check-out with families, or technical assistance for home. So maybe you have a group of families that really need you to send out a video on how to motivate your child who doesn't want to complete their independent schoolwork. And I love that check in, check out, which I'm going to share an example of you. I'm going to share an example of that with you. And how to do that, and some examples of how to do those other interventions as well. But then you're still going to have some families who may not be responding to those tier one and tier two activities, or they may have known struggles. They may be a family that doesn't have access to internet. They may have some negative school experiences of their own. They may experience trauma, have undergone CPS investigations, or parents may be incarcerated. All of those we would fall into that tier three and really need some individual and intensive interventions because they're most likely struggling with those ones at tier one and tier two. So that's when those community partnerships are really going to come into play, which I will talk about here a little bit more. Some one-on-one support and mentoring, and then some mental health supports that are more intensive and individualized based on their need. So when I've done this training, I've offered this example of really encouraging schools to look at this and try to identify some of those tiered supports that you may be able to put into place pretty quickly at your schools. And I encourage them to pick 3 universal or 3 tier 1 interventions, 2 tier 2, and 1 tier 3. So I'm going to share just some examples of these. These are not things that you have to be doing, but just some ideas. These are some things that either I personally did in the classroom or have had conversations with some educators that are doing these things now. So they are very practical things that can be put into place within your school. And that first one is just really going to be to make sure that you're maintaining strong two-way communication. This can be done through a variety of ways. As I mentioned earlier, you may want to see what methods of communication that your families prefer. You may be using one of the apps that you can see to the right of your screen, or something similar that allows you to communicate quickly and efficiently with your families. You can do things like provide an overview of the work for the week so that families are very aware of what's happening right now and what's expected of their students. It'll allow you to answer questions promptly throughout the day. And then one thing that I've seen a lot of people doing and that I tried to do last year was just send out a weekly message or offer up a phone call of praise and encouragement to each family. Because we know that, like I said, our families have always been critical to the success of our education system. But right now, they're an even bigger part than we ever imagined them being. Another idea was to have a virtual family engagement night or challenges that could help support that family bonding and those stronger school home relationships. So when you think of the traditional activities that you typically are doing for family engagement, you may be having a thing like a bingo for books or a curriculum night or something to teach about math games or how to help with homework. And you've probably put a lot of effort and thought and even money into those activities, and you're not getting the turnout that you would hope to receive. So really thinking about how you can create those in a different way. Could you have a challenge at home that our school did a virtual book club. So everybody read at home with their parents, and then they would post a picture to our school's Facebook page. And than the students were celebrated at the end of this for participating. So we got a lot of participation because it was able to be done on each family's time that was convenient for them. But we realized it still was important to them. They just may not have been able to come to the school for a certain event. You can see some examples there on the side of your screen with some other ideas. And then there's a website there that when you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on. Terrell shared that with me actually, and it had a lot of great ideas on it as well. And then another idea a school had from a family I was working with, a school I was working with, was to conduct a family survey to really gauge family wellness, those cultural considerations that you may not know about, and then each family's needs for support. And just sending that out either electronically or in the mail, and emphasizing your real desire to support them, that this isn't a gotcha. This isn't us judging what's happening in your home. This is really so we can get a solid understanding of what your experiences are so we can make sure we're offering things that are going to help you the most. And to follow up on that, the school decided they would have a virtual open house based on their survey results. So, they would be able to provide discussions or supports on those really overarching topics that were affecting most of their families, and then offer some breakout rooms for some specific areas of concern to just give parents a place to talk through some issues that they're having, and really get that connection built between school at home. And you can also record those to send out later as a tier 2 intervention. Like I said, making videos that families can access based on their needs is a really strong example of how you can support them while they're working with their students at home. Then I said I would touch on the check-in, check-out system for families in need of extra support. The school I'm working with that's doing this, and I have actually talked to several schools in the meantime that have also put this into place, are utilizing some of their specialists, their counselors, special education teachers. Being able to think outside of those classroom teachers as well. But they're setting up phone calls, messages, and virtual meetings with students and their families, at least weekly, if not daily, to just check in. And I know that this has helped to lead to better engagement, and it has helped build stronger relationships with those families. So just taking a few minutes a day to reach out, find out how things are going, find out what's going well, find out what they need help with, and just allowing those conversations to happen has really helped to garner some strong relationships this year. And then one idea of some tier 3 support would be, providing families that are still in need of additional supports with some one-on-one sessions and talk through some needs that they're having, and really talk about some community agencies that can provide additional supports. I've been working with a county here in the north who's really working to get this into place in their county and to really get those partnerships with the community organizations set up so that families know who they can reach out to for certain topics or certain struggles that they're having. So when you would do this, if you would decide to put this into place, just an example of what this would look like for you, that you would have a list of possible interventions to pull from, to say, okay, here's what we're going to do for all of our families. Here's what we're going to do for those that, need a little bit more that we weren't quite covering. And then here's something we can do for our families who really need the most support and the most help. But through doing this training and through having some conversations, not only with other experts in this field, but also educators across the state, I realized that there was a missing piece to what the conversation that we were having about family engagement. When we train on PBIS, we always say that if you want something, you must teach it, and then you must acknowledge it. We talk about that when, Terrell talked about teaching expectations, and we'd say to the people we're training that, if you're teaching children to do something and then you see them doing it, you need to acknowledge that they're doing it to provide that positive reinforcement and make it look more likely to happen. And I realized that, when we're talking about family engagement, we really need to make sure we're taking the time to acknowledge the stakeholders. This can be done pretty simply and pretty quickly. And these are all ideas that I know people across the state have done. Some of people are doing social media shout outs, doing a message on their school call out system. There was a school doing a loudspeaker announcement at their football games just to thank you to parents. Sending out postcards, sending them messages on Class Dojo or Schoology or whatever app that you're using, picking up the phone and saying thank you or saying we see the hard work that you're putting in now, putting a message on their school sign or something in the newspaper. To just really encourage parents to say that, we thank you for being a partner with us because we couldn't be doing this alone. Parents need educators, and educators also need parents. And just a few more examples of this. Someone I talked to was doing a very important parent award every week, and she would send out a certificate to those parents and just saying, you're really important to me and thank you for the things you're doing. I talked to a teacher recently that said, my students are making so much progress in reading, and I didn't think that was going to happen this year because we haven't been in school very much. And when we have been in school, they haven't all been here. And I'm so proud of their progress. She goes, and I know it's not just me. I encouraged her that absolutely you're a huge piece of that because you are guiding the instruction that your students are getting. We know that our families could not be doing this on their own. But without the family support at home, the students wouldn't be engaged in the way that they are. And she said, I just feel like I need to do something to tell them thank you. Or just sending that quick message, that encouragement that we know this is hard. This is hard on us, but you've got this. We've got this together. So, if you're looking at putting those interventions into place and you've made those ideas and you've thought, okay, here's some quick things that we can do to really engage our families a little bit better and make that mindset shift. What are we going to do now? So once you've chosen those interventions, I'm going to ask you to reflect on these questions. Are those things being implemented with fidelity? Have you followed through with them in the way you said you were going to? Do you have buy-in from both your staff and your families? Are you seeing more participation from your parents? And most importantly, are you seeing better outcomes for your students? And if so, you're going to continue looking for new ways to engage families that maybe you haven't thought of before. And you're going to plan for sustainability. A big conversation we've had with this is we know this is relevant to the context right now, but we want to look at the bigger picture and look at how we can sustain this idea of family engagement into the future when we're no longer in the middle of a pandemic and we're no longer dealing with the regulations in place because of COVID. But how can we really strengthen family engagement to make this last for the long haul? And if you cannot answer yes to the questions, we're going to adjust that as needed. The interventions you chose may not have been the most successful ones. So you're going to figure out where to rework that and replan that. Keep going and be patient with yourself, and let us help you. Alicia showed you the map of the behavior support specialists. And there is one in every region. So reach out to your behavior support specialist, and I'll share our information at the end. Reach out to Terrell and I, and we'd be more than happy to help you figure out, either your first steps or your next steps. Because I loved this quote because I thought it wrapped up the conversation we're having perfectly, that each one of us can make a difference, but together we can make change. So I know that as educators, you're doing everything you can to make a difference in the lives of your students. But when you're able to partner with families in a really meaningful way, you're really going to create the change that I know you're looking to see in your students. So here are just a few resources that we pulled from today. But like I said, I wanted to share our information with you. Again, Terrell Jones is in the South. I am in the North. Alicia is helping to cover the Mountain and Eastern Panhandle region. But regardless of what region you are in, you are welcome to reach out to either one of us, and we'll be more than happy to help you and point you in the right direction. So I'm going to stop sharing now and turn this back over to Alicia. I'm not sure if there were any questions in the chat that we need to address, Alicia, or if anyone has any now, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
We did have one question, and I tried to answer it, and I think you might have hit on it, but Bridget, I hope I'm saying your name right. She said, we are using different strategies to get family feedback in our program, but we seem to be having difficult time getting them to give us feedback. Does anyone have any suggestions on how to get them to reach back out to us with their feedback?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when I talked to her, when I put in there, I said you were just going over those tier 2 interventions, and I think that might be something to think about, but also acknowledging the ones who do or are setting up an acknowledgement system for getting feedback. But I think one of the things we took from Nancy Klein, and that was a really mindset shift from us, is maybe the goal doesn't need to be everyone at once. One family that you make a better relationship with, that you get more information from, is still a win. That's going to allow you to build a better family engagement program. So maybe highlighting a family that you think might be served best in a tier 2 kind of category, seeing how that relationship goes, seeing how you can make change. I know we want everybody all in because we know that their input is so important to us. But I think when she said that to us in our meeting, I was like, that's such a great um, suggestion, is to one family, one better quality relationship is one family with a better quality relationship for our school. And we can continue to do that a little bit at a time. So I don't think that's a bad way of looking at it either. You can have access to these slides if you were registered, which you had to be able to get in. I am going to send out a copy of this presentation, or the recording of it, and a copy of the slides with that. It might not be till the beginning of next week. It just depends on when our IT, Jimmy, can get this to me for YouTube. For the YouTube link. And when I say our IT department, it really is just Jimmy. So it depends on how busy he is. But we'll get those out to you, and I'm going to send that out to everybody. Is there any other questions? Erin, I talked through all of that. Do you have any suggestions for about getting feedback?
Yeah, you did a great job covering that. But one thing I will add, just because it was a question that came up on something else that I was on. And one idea was just to pick up the phone and make that phone call to families. If you're reaching out to them in several ways and you're not hearing back from them, but it is a family, especially if it's one you are concerned about or you feel that you need their specific feedback, and not to necessarily ask them the questions. You could. One school was going to do that. They were going to pick up the phone and just ask the questions on the survey, but just say, hey, how are things going right now? I just wanted to check in and see if that opens the door to that communication and their willingness. It may work and it may not work. And like Alicia said, if it doesn't, hopefully once they see that playing out, in that school environment and in that community, that they'll be a little bit more willing to open up. But
oh, sorry.
Nope, that's it. I was just going to say, just, take the time to reach out, especially if it's someone that you feel is going to benefit from that.
At the beginning of reentry, like the first reentry in August, when we thought we're really going to get some momentum, we talked to several schools, and one of the suggestions that we had grabbed from somewhere or that we created was to create a script. So if you're calling a family, that you kind of follow a script of how are you, and these are the questions that we want to know, and these are the questions that we need to know, and these are some of the questions from the survey, because that allows any classroom teacher, any special education teacher, anybody who has the time to reach out is going to have a very similar conversation across the board. Because sometimes maybe that I'm not sure how to start the conversation, I'm not sure how to follow up on the conversation, is a hindrance to those phone calls. So having your PBIS team or your school leadership team kind of build a script of, if you're going to call a parent, this is kind of the things you start to say that starts conversations with parents, and you might find that to be helpful as well. Anybody else have any questions that we can help you with? I did put a link to our request for assistance. Don't be intimidated by that. All that does is let us know that you would like to talk to us more. We love small questions. We love big questions. You can email us, or you can fill out the technical assistance, and we will be happy to provide whatever technical assistance we can for you. So we hope everybody stays warm and safe. think just about everybody's supposed to get snow or ice, and we thank you for joining us. I know for a lot of you, this is after school, so we appreciate your time, and great job, Erin and Terrell.
Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you.